Hello, I'm Jordan. So for Nonfiction November, Steve Donahue and I were doing a read along of Rats by Robert Sullivan. Steve, I think, became a little distracted, perhaps, from continuing this. Understandably so. I think he's in Vermont, or at least he was for the last week or so. So that's understandable. I am going to go ahead and continue to forge ahead here. This is going to be the last installment. These are the final chapters, chapters 16 through 20. And I will say that I think these are the best chapters yet as far as writing goes. These are extremely well written chapters. Sullivan really shows his true colors as a writer in these final chapters, I think. And I think that's largely because he decided that he needs to kind of take stock of what he was doing over the past year and wrap it up in kind of a satisfying way, while also justifying the fact that he wrote about rats in the first place, which I'll be getting to what exactly I mean by that. So these chapters start out talking more about disease, and particularly plague. There's a fascinating account of a plague outbreak in San Francisco in the early 1900s in Chinatown, and the cynical way that information was suppressed by people in power and people, business owners, for political and economic reasons, which was very, very it just felt quite relevant now, given the current global situation. So that was quite interesting. It moves on from there, talking about how Sullivan somehow became involved with a health department project in New York City to assess the rodent population. I think largely with an eye to determining if the rodents are could be potentially used as catalysts for biological warfare. I think, with the idea that someone could, as an act of terrorism or an act of war, infect the rats of the city. So this health department group, Sullivan somehow manages to travel around with them and catch rats. Um, like I said last time, he had previously attempted to catch rats in his own alley, Eden's Alley, and failed. He now succeeds with the help of these various professionals. And what follows is one of the most upsetting, certainly the most upsetting um, moment in this book, in which they take these captured rats into an abandoned shed, close the door. Sullivan says it feels kind of strangely illicit, and you can tell that there is a sense. I mean, I would argue that there is a sense of shame and guilt to what's happening here, and maybe that's just me reading into it. Because essentially, what these people do is they drug the rats, not very effectively. The rats keep waking up during the process. They draw blood from the rats in order for later testing in the lab, and then they proceed to one by one methodically murder the rats that they captured. And it is just blood chilling, repulsive behavior, and it's one of the most upsetting things I have read this year. Period. Which is not to say that it makes me dislike the book. It is fascinating for sure. I will go back and say that this book is about people interacting with rats as pests, not so much about rats. I think that's something that anyone who's interested in reading this should be aware of. I wish I had known. Which is not, again, to say that I'm disliking the book. It's just not at all what I expected. So from that point, I think Sullivan decided he wanted to wind this thing down a little bit, and he wanted to take stock of what this book meant and why he wrote it. And I think he does that pretty well. I think the general theme, or the general message, I guess if you could call it that he kind of ends up with, is that urban rats, are deeply tied to human experience in urban settings and human experience in general. Rats are survivors, despite all odds, and they survive in often ugly, unattractive, rat-like ways. And he ties that very nicely to human survival. I do think that, especially in the afterword of this book, Sullivan feels the need to justify the fact that he wrote this thing. He admits himself several times in this book that he is repulsed by rats. He does not like rats. He does come to respect them. But he also has this attitude that, that writing this book is somehow shameful or something that he needs to constantly explain. And I'm sure he does to a lot of people, certainly. But I would argue, given how little there is about actual rats in this book, there shouldn't be a whole lot of flack that Sullivan is catching as a result of this. This is a book about people killing rats, 100%. Very little about actual rat lifestyle, rat experience, how the rats interact with each other. None of that was ever really covered, except for in a very brief way, where Sullivan reveled in the fact that rats are constantly having sex, which is a fact that I'm assuming he included because it's quite interesting, but also because it's repulsive. And Sullivan was very interested in the repulsive aspects of rats, which is not to say that urban rats are not repulsive. They certainly are. I'm not going to say that, and they certainly are different than pet rats, 100%. But I do think that there is a kind of an unfair attitude towards these creatures, which this book does very little to, um, I don't know, to dispel. But that's okay. It is a very good book. I highly enjoyed it. It's a quick read. If you're interested, go ahead and read it. You could probably read it in a day or two. It was kind of arduous to stretch this out over the course of a month. But it was a lot of fun. I did learn a lot about people and their relationship to urban rats. I would recommend going to a different book if you want to learn about actual rat behavior and stuff like that. If anyone knows of one, please let me know. I'd be happy to know about that. So yeah, I think that's it. I think I will wrap up the read along of Rats by simply saying it's a very very enjoyable book, even if it's not at all what I expected. And perhaps Steve will come up to date and do his own little concluding video. I'll leave a link to his channel down below. But thank you for watching, and thank you for following along if you have been, and let me know what you think. Let me know if my rant is totally uncalled for and not at all relevant to what this book actually is. That's totally possible. I admit I'm biased. But yeah, anyways, thank you for watching. Have a good day.